Hey there, young historians. Today we're going to do a video lesson, and you're going to have something called guided notes with you, a piece of paper like this, and it's got some blanks, and you're filling those blanks in as we go, and you're also seeing the format of how a good page of notes should look. So by the end, you've got a good page of notes, but you didn't have to do a ton of writing, you just got to kind of follow along. Now, I've got a clue for you each time that you see some writing in red. That is something that you should write down on your notes. Okay, so that's what you're really looking for, but you're paying attention to and listening to everything else. Feel free to pause the video if you need to, if you want to write down those notes. And the title is The Era of Reform. So let's first break that down. What does this title mean? An era is a period of time, a time period, an era. You got the era of the dinosaurs, you got the technology era. We're talking about the era of reform. So we need to find out now, what does reform mean? Reform means to change for the better, or moral improvement. Find something wrong and it needs to be reformed or improved for the better. So notice that that is in red. Oops, this way is in red. And that is something that you're writing down on your notes. It is the first top part here. I also didn't say that you should make sure that you put your name in and today's date, which is also a good method of taking notes, is to document those things. All right, so reform, change for the better, or moral improvement. Let's stop to think about what you think needs to be reformed in America today. Are there some problems that exist in the United States or in society? There's lots of homelessness. There's certain groups that maybe are marginalized, that are not treated equally. Women, members of the LGBTQ+ community, people of color, etc. There are wars that are going on, their amount of taxes or inflation. Those are some problems that might exist in America that need to be reformed today. So let's talk about now what needed to be reformed in the early 1800s. We're going to go back in time now and ask the same question. Well, there are millions of people in this country that were enslaved. That's something that needed to be reformed. Women had only slightly more rights than enslaved people. That's right, women were treated as second-class citizens as well. Only white men were in positions of power, like making laws. There was no female lawmakers, only white male lawmakers. And education, it was only available for the wealthy. Those are some problems that existed in society that needed to be reformed or improved. So let's start with what is the spirit of reform? Where does it come from that people want to have moral improvement? There's a theory called transcendentalism. To transcend means to go beyond. To transcend means to go beyond. So transcendentalism is people that want to go beyond the purely logical thinking and think further. That's the idea of transcendentalism. And people who believed in this are called transcendentalists. All right, so transcend means to go beyond. And notice again that there's some things in red here. I can't get that right. This way is red. That you are writing down on your note page. So the idea of transcendentalism leads to people believing that you should think for yourselves, not just what's logical, what other people tell you. Think for yourself. Don't just follow rules mindlessly. Question authority. Now, sometimes you need to follow authority, but to question it means to always just wonder, why? Why is that in place? Can that be better? Can that be fixed instead of just accepting these rules? For instance, somebody tells you it is bedtime. That's the rule. Well, you might question that authority by saying something like, what is time anyway? Why is it important? What is really important in life? What is the meaning of life? It might lead you to all kinds of tangents here, but it is bedtime is authority, and those are some questions you might ask. Now, transcendentalists also supported civil disobedience. Disobey means to break a rule, not follow the rule, but do this civilly, in a peaceful way. So, civil disobedience would be peacefully resist laws that you feel are unfair. Now, of course, this is not like violent laws that might really hurt other people, but laws, for instance, like paying your taxes. Some people might say, those taxes are being used for unfair things, so no. Somebody might say, go fight in the war. And somebody who's practicing civil disobedience would just say, no, I'm not going to go to war. I don't want to go and harm somebody else. It's not my war, it's your war. I'm not going to do that. So there's a lot of transcendentalists that peacefully resisted laws that they felt were unfair. And one of those people was Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a teacher, and he believed that every human has unlimited potential. They just need to learn to trust their emotions and their intuition. So the transcendentalist and the teacher, Ralph Waldo Emerson, said this: do not go where the path may lead. That's following authority. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. That is civil disobedience. That is questioning that authority and doing something where they think on their own. Another transcendentalist is Henry David Thoreau. Now, he was a student of the last one, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and at one time he decided that he wanted to really question society by going out and living on his own and seeing, could he survive without anybody else, without any of the rules of life in society, any of the laws that existed, and without money. So he had this small cabin on Walden Pond, and he chose this because he wanted to be close to nature, find the truth within himself, and to really live off of nature. Go fishing for food, grow crops and vegetables to go along with the food that he would fish for, or the fish that he would fish for. And he wrote this all down in a book called Walden, The Life in the Woods. And he lived there for 2 years, 2 months, and how many days do you think? 2. 2 and 2. And he really was able to get in tune with himself and really transcend or go beyond. Here's a replica of his cabin on Walden Pond that's in Concord, Massachusetts. He also was very famous for the idea of civil disobedience. He actually influenced Gandhi in India. Some of you might be familiar with Mahatma Gandhi. And he also influenced Martin Luther King Jr. We know quite a bit about Dr. King, and a lot of his civil disobedience actions were inspired by Henry David Thoreau. He also at one time went to jail for that civil disobedience. He refused to pay taxes because he felt those taxes were being used for an unfair purpose to go and support the Mexican-American War. We talked about that in this class, that the Mexican-American War was the United States fighting against Mexico to eventually take the land from them. He said, I'm not going to pay those taxes because you're going to use them for war. Here's a picture of Henry David Thoreau. He would say something, this is not a direct quote, but he might say something like, go ahead, arrest me. I do what I think is right, even though my neck beard is so wrong. Ew, look at that. That is really gross. Just neck beard. Okay, let's take a break time here. Would you rather this or would you rather that? You can get with this or you can get with that. Let's decide here. Which one would you rather? Would you rather this, a little bit of monies, or would you rather that, a lot of monies? I would imagine most of you would probably want a lot of money. Would you rather this, someone else making your decisions for you, or would you rather make your own decisions? I think most of us want that independence. Would you rather be forced to work or work because you want to? I don't think you want to be forced to work. Would you rather have no voice in your government or have a voice in your government, like perhaps in a democracy where you get to vote? Would you rather be taxed without representation or be taxed with representation? I mean, the United States fought a war for this. The colonists fought a war because they were being taxed without representation. So I imagine most of you would rather that, not so much this, right? Take a quick break, take your note page up to Mr. Huggins and show him your progress so far, stretch a little bit, and then get back to the video. Okay, let's get into our first reform movement, education reform. So we are now about here, number 2, just so you see we're moving along. We're on education reform. In the 1800s, most children didn't go to school. Now you might think, oh, that sounds great. I don't want to go to school. I like the long weekends. I like vacations. I like breaks. But I think if you really thought hard about this, you would realize that school is really valuable, that you get a lot from it, and that you would probably miss having school. So there were a few states that provided a free public education, but not many. The schools that did exist were often overcrowded with poorly trained teachers, some of them with like a 5th grade education themselves, and the kids went just part-time. Now this man, Horace Mann, he is the man, he came along and he was like, we got to fix this. This is a problem that exists in society. Society works a whole lot better with an educated population. So he led an education reform to start public schools paid by tax dollars. Everybody pays in, they use the money to help everybody equally. He wanted to provide public schools in more places so everyone had a chance at a good education. Horace Mann might say something like this. Can you guess what he's going to say? Something about education, probably, right? Nay! I'm a Horace Mann. Get it? Anyway, by 1850, most white children in the North, especially boys, attended free public schools. That's about 50 years later as a result of Horace Mann's work. In the South, few girls were attending public schools and no African Americans. Few girls and no African Americans. But most white children in the North, especially boys, were getting free public schools by 1850. Most high schools and colleges never admitted girls. In 1837, Oberlin College in Ohio became the first to accept women. Way to go, Oberlin College and Ohio. Woo! All right. A little bit more of a break time. And now, just a minute of humor. Wait for it. No. Okay. Oh, looks like they built a fence to keep the dog in. What is this? Nope. Oh, what? Oh, of course. That's a good one. Oh, this will end well. Bet you can't guess what's going to happen here. Go! Yoinks! One more cat video for all the cat fans. Get out of my face. Okay, this is the last one. Okay, and now something that is not funny at all. We got our laughter out because the next topic is not a happy topic. This is the movement to end slavery. We are on number 3 here. Number 3. A definition for you. Slavery is when one human purchases and owns another human. That owner treats their enslaved people like property. The owner can do whatever they want with their enslaved person. They can buy them, sell them, force them to work, beat them, and even kill them. This was all legal. Beginning in 1619, when the first Africans were kidnapped from their homeland and brought to North America against their will. A little bit of background for you. And so a movement to begin this brutal tradition starts around this time. Many Americans supported this brutal tradition, even though they didn't all own people themselves. However, fortunately, there were some people who transcended, remember the Transcendentalists, who transcended this evil thinking. These people supported an end to slavery. They're known as abolitionists. You're writing this one down. Abolitionists. They believe in abolition or an end to slavery. And the movement to end slavery is called the abolition movement. To abolish means to end. And so that's what this abolition movement is. Abolitionists wanted to end slavery, but they had different thoughts about how this should happen. They agreed that it should end, but they had different ideas about how it should end. One thought or idea was to inspire enslaved people to rise up and lead a violent revolt, kill the people who owned them, and gain their independence that way. Pretty violent. I don't know that we all wanted to turn them into murderers, but some people believed in that. Some people wanted to find a peaceful method, maybe legislate it, make some laws that would outlaw it. And yet, again, some people wanted to give slaveholders time to find farming methods that didn't rely on slavery. That over time, as they were transitioning into a different system, perhaps using some sort of machines at some point, or by actually paying people to be employees or workers, give them time so they could transition away from this system of slavery. From the beginning, white Americans and black Americans were both part of the abolition movement. There were white allies and black Americans. And one of these people is named Frederick Douglass. He's probably the most well-known abolitionist. He had been enslaved brutally, and he escaped slavery. He got himself into a northern state. When he arrived there, he began to educate himself teach himself how to read and write. He was very charismatic. He was an excellent speaker. And he would tell stories of what it was like to be in slavery. He would tell these cruel stories of enslaved people or of enslaved children, and he would get people to cry. It was so emotional. He would tell of preachers telling their enslaved people to love slavery, and people laughed about this. In 1845, he published his autobiography. It was called Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. It was an instant bestseller. People really were curious of what it was like in slavery. He even started his own abolitionist newspaper called the North Star. On the left there is a picture of the man, the 40-year-old Frederick Douglass, and on the right is a picture of the legend, the 70-year-old Frederick Douglass. Another abolitionist, his name is William Lloyd Garrison. He was a white man. He was extremely religious. He started an abolitionist newspaper as well in 1831. It's called The Liberator. To liberate means to free. He demanded the immediate freeing of all enslaved people. That's what he talked about in The Liberator. He wanted to demand the immediate freeing of all enslaved people. Many people in the North, they did not like this. And some didn't even support abolition. As long as it was happening down there in the South where they didn't have to see it, they were fine with it. At one time, a pro-slavery group, someone who was in favor of it, they even destroyed his printing press, they burnt down his house, they beat him up, but still he continued to speak for abolition and ending slavery. Another abolitionist, her name is Sojourner Truth. Now that wasn't her given name when she was born, but it was a name that she adopted, Sojourner Truth. She was an abolitionist. And later she was a reformer for women's rights. She had a very, very interesting story. She was formerly enslaved. She had multiple children who were sold away from her in slavery, which is really one of the most brutal parts of slavery, is that women could have children, and their children would then be seen as property that could be sold off to somebody else. That would be terrifying. Ugh, terrible. In 1851, she became famous for a speech she gave called Ain't I a Woman? And in this, she compared herself to other women who were, especially white women, who were being treated as prim and proper. And she was saying things like, and I'm out there working in the fields. I'm working like cattle. And ain't I a woman too? Don't you think you should treat me better? She also did something historic. She sued a white man to recover her son from slavery, her son that was sold away from her. It was the first time that a black woman had successfully won a court case against a white man in a case like this. Pretty historic. Some of her children she never saw again. All right. Now we're moving from Sojourner Truth, who was an abolitionist and a reformer for women's rights, to now women's rights in general. We're on number 4, which is now on the back page of your notes, right up here at the top. Many abolitionists were also women. They were in a strange position, women abolitionists, I mean, because they were trying to make slavery illegal, abolition, but they themselves couldn't vote or hold office. They did not have that right yet. So they were trying to change laws, but they couldn't even vote or be the ones to change those laws. They raised money for abolition, but their fathers and their husbands controlled their property and their money. Women were not allowed to own their own property or have their own money. And they spoke out against the beating of enslaved people, but their husbands could discipline them however they wanted. You can see how they're in a strange spot here. They don't have many rights themselves, but they're speaking up for other people's rights. So some examples of the unequal treatment of women. Again, remember that we're looking for items in red and writing those down. The image that you had just seen a couple times there, that was Lucy Stone. She went to that first college, Oberlin College, that allowed women in. And she went there, graduated in 1847. She was invited to write a speech at the college. But a man would have to deliver the speech that she wrote because women weren't allowed to give speeches at the college. She stood behind a curtain while her speech was read by a man. After graduation, she spoke for women's rights. She refused to pay taxes herself, civil disobedience, because it was taxation without representation. That should sound familiar to you from past stories like the colonists. No taxation without representation. Again, remember, the colonists fought a war over that topic. All right. Another example of unequal treatment of women. This is Elizabeth Blackwell, brilliant woman. She studied math, science, history. She wanted to be a doctor. However, She was rejected by 29 medical schools until she was finally accepted into one. In 1849, she graduates at the top of her class. She becomes the first female doctor in the United States. Hey, a big win. Still, no hospitals or doctors would agree to work with her. After all of that, clearly she's qualified. That story is to be continued. We're going to go ahead to 1848, an event called the Seneca Falls Convention. This is July of 1848. It's significant because it marks the beginning of the organized women's rights movement in the United States. About 300 people attend. There were some men there as well. And in this event, this convention, they wrote the Declaration of Sentiments. That should sound familiar to you. It sounds like the Declaration of Independence. Sentiments are feelings. The Declaration of Sentiments. In this, they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. Just as the Declaration of Independence lists the tyrannical acts of King George, the Declaration of Sentiments lists the tyrannical acts by men over women. Let's see if you get the idea here. Remember this. Men didn't let women vote. Tyrant! Men did not give women the right to own property. Tyrant! Men did not allow women to practice law or medicine. Say it with me. Tyrants! That's right. Men were acting like tyrants over women. This was modeled off the Declaration of Independence. So at the convention, what they decide is that they're going to fight for the right to vote, a constitutional amendment to change the law of the land. Well, the legacy of the Seneca Falls Convention is this. It gets the women's rights movement kicking. It gets things started in 1848. It also creates a few famous, they're called suffragettes, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They become partners. Stanton liked to write, not speak, and Anthony liked to speak. They were a great pair. Susan B. Anthony was a great speaker. She traveled all over the country giving speeches about women's rights. I remember one of her quotes was something along the lines of, someone has fought for your right to vote, use it. Yep, that was one of her speeches. And slowly things begin to change. In New York, women got more control over their money and their property. Massachusetts and Indiana passed new divorce laws, which make it easier for women to divorce their husbands. And you remember Elizabeth Blackwell? She's back. Here's a continuation of her story. She started her own hospital. It included a medical school to train female doctors. Remember, nobody would work with her, nobody would hire her, so she said, fine, I'm going to do it myself. Of all of the women who were at the Seneca Falls Convention and who signed that Declaration of Sentiments, only one of them actually lived long enough to vote in a U.S. election. Her name is Charlotte Woodward. See, this was in 1848, and women gained the right to vote in the United States in 1920. Yeah, 72 years later. Okay, the last item to write down in your notes is finishing the word suffrage. Now that sounds bad. It sounds like suffering. Oh, I'm suffering. I got a headache. Oh, my arm hurts. I'm suffering. That's not what it is. Suffrage is good. It means the right to vote. I have suffrage. I've been talking about that. I have the right to vote. I have suffrage. People who worked for the right to vote were called suffragists. There's Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, two of those suffragists. Okay, I'm not going to go over this review, but it would be a good idea for you to go over this review and also to compare the this or that and see how that fits into those different reform movements. That's it here. I hope that you learned a bit about the era of reform, just a quick lesson. You should have a full page of notes now. You should understand a little bit more about how notes should be framed out. And hold on to this, because it might come in handy. All right, that's it, the era of reform. Peace.